Good evening, everyone. It's 6:04, but I am now recording the meeting and we are also streaming live on Facebook. So Vice Chair Jackson, whenever you're ready, we could go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Janae. And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Probation Oversight's virtual special meeting. I'm officially calling this meeting to order at 6:04 p.m. on Wednesday, April 27th, 2022. Wendy, it would be great if you could get us started with the commissioner roll call.
I will do that. And I just heard from Commissioner Meredith that he is joining and didn't have the right link. So I'll maybe talk slow for the beginning before we get to the roll call. For those of you who've attended our town halls in the past, tonight is slightly different in the sense that we're holding it as a formal public meeting of the Probation Oversight Commission. We do have and can have a quorum of commissioners here because the agenda was officially posted, and we will be recording and officially post the minutes. We only have one discussion item, a discussion of the probation department's budget, and the commission will not be taking any action tonight requiring a vote. Our meeting is being broadcast today live to our Facebook page, as you heard. You can watch on Facebook Live. You can also watch it later on Facebook Live, but there's no engagement with users on Facebook. You can also follow our social media accounts. We have a new and exciting team member who is our community information officer, Ismael Chinchilla, who is really making our social media more communicative. So we encourage you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at LA County POC. You can get more information about our meetings, and we encourage you to please invite others to attend. I'll explain later in the evening how you can participate after the presentations. For those of you who are our regular attendees, you may note that the raise your hand feature is currently disabled. We will enable that feature as soon as we're ready to take public comment after the presentations. So I'll start now by taking roll. If you could unmute yourselves, commissioners. Commissioner Dolores Canales.
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Danielle Dupuy is absent tonight. Commissioner Sean Garcia Lay.
I'm here.
Commissioner Ishay Jackson.
I'm here.
Commissioner Sam Lewis. I don't see Commissioner Lewis on yet, but we'll let you know if and when he joins. Commissioner Don Meredith. All right, Don, I know is trying to sign on. So again, I will let you know when he arrives. Commissioner Dominique Nong.
Good evening.
Commissioner Kai Yamashiro.
Present.
Great. And Chair Frankie Carrillo is absent. So we do have a quorum, and I will now turn it over to you, Vice Chair Jackson.
Great. Thank you, Wendy. I have quite a bit to say. I want to thank everyone again for joining this highly anticipated meeting about probation, the Probation Department's budget. As we know, budgets reflect values and priorities, which is especially important right now because we're in a key window where the CEO, guided by the Board of Supervisors, is developing the budget for the upcoming 2022-2023 fiscal year. We have 3 expert panelists joining us tonight to present on the department's budget. After that presentation, the commissioners will have a chance to comment and ask questions. Then we'll sort of reserve the second half of the meeting to listening to comments and questions that participants have on the presentations that took place tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to promote education about the budget process, transparency into the process, and to serve the POC's goal to guide reform efforts and act as a liaison to the Board of Supervisors. First, we'll hear from Mr. Robert Smythe, Administrative Deputy for the department, who will present the 2022-2023 budget with the focus on budget fluctuations in some key areas. He'll also answer some questions that the commissioners presented to him during our last meeting on the issue. And then we'll have Principal Analyst Anna Ham-Wong, sorry if I'm not saying that right, Ham-Wong from the CEO's office, who will talk about the budget process and the trends over the years in the probation's budget. We'll also have Policy Coordinator Nicole Brown here with us tonight from the Urban Peace Institute, who has studied the Probation Department's budget in great detail and who also authored that great report. I'm not sure if they have access to that report, but I encourage those who do to review it either before or after this meeting. So she'll be here to offer more insight into that and with more sort of feedback on whether the budget aligns with the goals of justice reform goals. I'm sorry, with the goals of Youth Justice Reimagined. There was a bit of a tongue twister there. But Mr. Robert Smythe, thank you for being here. It would be great for you to get started.
Mr. Smythe, you're on mute if you're speaking.
Yeah, I
There we
just
go.
unmuted it, looking for that PowerPoint, and
Right.
there it is.
There we
So,
go.
hey, there's my name on the first page. So if we can skip past that and go to the second page, and I'll get rolling. Great. And by the way, thank you for the comment about expert panelists. I always look over my shoulder and see if somebody's behind me when you make a reference like that. So who's she talking to? But thank you very much. As mentioned, there were some questions that were provided in advance. So these PowerPoints, and there's only about 9 slides, and they're pretty quick, but they provide some of the details about the questions that were asked. So the first one was, I put at the title of POC question, but it was really a request. Give us some highlights on the 22-23 budget focused on juvenile institutions, what we call JIS, categories that have gone up or down. The 21-22 budget change was 0 in JIS. So nothing went up, nothing down, except because someone will look online and say, hey, that went up. You lied to us. No, but we did not request anything more for JIS. What went up or down are what we call ministerial changes. And those are just generally inflation caused changes. And there's more detail on this on a subsequent slide, slide number 4. But I gave just 2 little bullet points there. One is, for example, retiree health insurance. Every county department contributes to a fund that pays for the health insurance costs for those who are retired and those who will retire in the future, as well as there's cost increases for things like electricity, gas, and water, just like there would be in your own home. So that's the only types of stuff. And I give more examples again when I get to slide 4. I give more examples of that coming in the future. And by the way, the slide numbers at the top right corner, when I say slide 4, you can refer to those. So that's what I wanted to say about slide 1. If we can, slide 2, I'm sorry, using that number at the top. We can go to the next slide, please. There we go. These are the requests, other than ministerial issues, which will come up on another slide. These are the requests of the department for the coming fiscal year. None of these requests are approved. This is just what probation asked for. Okay, so I'll walk through them real quickly, but I'm happy to slow down if any questions come up along the way. And I number them just so we can follow them. Number 1, emergency management. This is to create a more robust process of emergency management in the department. As you might understand, probation has a lot of officers out in the field. We want to be able to keep track of those officers and where they are. Right now, we don't have a 24/7 operation to do that. This will create essentially a 24/7 dispatch operation for the department. So 13 people, that's the far right column on the number 1 line there. And the cost of that is $2.2 million. And that 2.2, I believe, includes a little bit of equipment. And again, none of this is approved yet. This is just what we asked for. The rest of the way down the column under that number 13, there are a bunch of zeros. There are no more positions asked for the coming fiscal year, just those for emergency management. And these are people like dispatchers and clerical staff to support them, and some radio equipment to support that as well. Line 2, this is what's called Assembly Bill 1869 fines and fees backfill. $18 million, by the way, all these numbers in the dollars column are in millions. $8 million was legislative funding that was provided by the state to backfill the loss of the ability to collect fines and fees. So this is LA County's proportion of the statewide allocation of that money. As you may be aware, we no longer collect fines and fees from our clients. The third line, $2.5 million IT refresh, and that's something that annually occurs in order to replace laptops and other peripheral equipment that expire or reach their useful life, so to speak, break down and so on. So that's $2.5 million for a population of over 5,000 employees. Line 4, I mentioned this last time I spoke to the POC, and this is asking for $900,000, which is the change in the cost of utilities that power the Central Juvenile Hall. LA County USC Medical Center has a power plant, or the whole county facility there is served by a power plant. Our portion of that has gone up $900,000, so we're asking for the county to backfill that. That cost increase is largely driven by the green energy movement, which is more expensive. So, and we understand the goals of green energy and clean environment and all those worthy goals. We're just recognizing the fact that it's costing us an extra $900,000. The fifth line there is not asking for new positions. It's asking to realign some positions, so change the titles and functions of those positions. Largely what that's for is to prepare for greater accountability in the juvenile arena for new programs such as the Family First program. And Family First will come up later in one of my slides. Family First is the replacement for the Title IV waiver program. It's not the same program, but it's the program that's coming along after the fact. Title IV waiver was eliminated. It's sunsetted, if you will. It's a federal program. It sunsetted in approximately 2019, 2020. It overlapped 2 fiscal years, so I maybe mixed up the dates there. And this was the replacement for that. So that's what these 3 realigned positions are for. They're for administrative positions to keep track and provide the accountability and record keeping for claiming against the Family First program. And we have to keep detailed records of the casework and time that each officer spends. And then our claim against that program has to be supported by that casework activity and the time records. And those programs are audited quite frequently by the state of California. And if we don't pass the audit, for example, let's say they take a sample of 100 cases and 10 don't pass, we got to pay 10% of the money back. They project that to the entire population. The 6th and 7th. The 6th one is we put a placeholder in. We were going to ask for IT positions. We did not yet. That is to address some of the increasing IT expectations on our department. And we have a lot of IT positions which represent technologies from the past. And we recognize that we need to move forward with those technologies. We actually still have some systems that are programmed on technologies like COBOL, which is an old programming language that is fading away, so to speak. So we do have some folks to support that, but we need more people that are web designers or can program. I'm not going to claim to be an IT expert, but can use modern technology and modern programming technology to build systems, extract data, respond to POC, OIG, and others who ask for information. And number 7 there, these are just corrections in JIS, Juvenile Institution Services, for 7 SDPO items. Those are supervising deputy probation officers. And it simply is they're realigned within the organization. How they got realigned, how they got misaligned, I don't know, but that occurred many years ago. And we're just trying to clean it up. We're not asking for more positions. We're not asking for more money, but LA County's Board of Supervisors votes on a budget. That budget aligns positions in a certain structure, what we all call an org structure. It also aligns the money with that structure. Currently, there's 7 of these positions that are misaligned. We're just trying to correct it. So if it doesn't get corrected, then we just use the budget the way it is. The 7 positions don't go away. We're just trying to align it correctly for cost accounting purposes. So if you ask a question like, how much does it cost to run this camp? Make sure that the costs are accurately accounted for in the org structure. So I hope that wasn't too detailed, but that's what's going on for the coming fiscal year, except for the next slide. So we can go to that one. And this is what I refer to, thank you. This is what I refer to as ministerial changes. These are things that change largely beyond our control. So I mentioned the retiree health insurance. There's also something called retiree health OPEB contributions. There's a quiz now. What does OPEB mean? It means other public employee benefits. And those are other types of benefits, largely retiree type benefits. So retiree pensions and that sort of thing. You may hear in the news that public pensions are largely underfunded in this city or this state, whatever. LA County is actually pretty good at funding its LACERA, that's the Retirement Association, at funding its LACERA obligations and keeping the trust fund healthy. So this is to make sure that we keep pace with the contributions to LACERA that pay for the entitled obligations of those who retire. So that's what OPEB stands for. And that's a very common phrase used nationwide for people that deal in retirement. OPEB is not a county unique thing, it's a nationwide term. Longevity bonus, this is to recognize that some of our employees are getting older and we do estimated actual projections on the amount of longevity bonus that that these folks are entitled to. And by the way, longevity bonuses are something that the county board passes. And if you reach, I think it's 20, 25, and 30 years of service, there's a certain percentage of bonus. So this reflects the additional cost. That 0.2 means $200,000. Workers' compensation, this is to reflect an increase in our average workers' compensation costs over the years of $2.3 million. Now you see some with negative numbers on them. Vehicle replacement program, I should have numbered each of these lines, but I neglected to do that. Vehicle replacement program is an annual program that the county has to replace aging vehicles. I mentioned earlier, replace aging IT equipment. Well, this is replace aging vehicles. So this is the allocation from last year, which is going away. So this is to recognize that there's a change from the budget we're currently in to the one that starts July 1, 2022. $9.4 million is going away. We will request a new vehicle replacement program allotment or appropriation at some point in the future when that money becomes available. And that can be handled either in final changes, which Anna's going to talk about the budget phases, or in the supplemental budget, which occurs in September-ish or leading up to September. The next one that's negative is $14.6 million. This is to reflect that the money that was allocated by the state, or I think it comes through the courts, for the pretrial pilot program is gone. That money has been expended for that program for the various needs and has sunsetted, and the money goes away. So again, these changes reflect what we would like to see change from the current state that we're in, the current budget, to the one that starts July 1. So 14.6 will go away in July 1. And the last one is the negative $5.8 million is what's called the Funding Certainty Grant, which was bridge funding for the loss of the Title IV waiver program. So this bridge funding is ending. The legislation expires June 30th. So $5.8 million is going to be gone as of June or July 1. So July 1, this shows it being gone. And the new funding is at Family First. So Title IV, this Funding Certainty Grant, and then the new Family First program starting next year. So that it ends up being a negative impact from the ministerial changes on the budget. So the next slide, please. Okay, this one's basically a question, and what is the real amount of spending disaggregated, that means broken apart into detail, by S&EB, that's Salaries and Employee Benefits, and S&S, and I'm proud of all of you for using those phrases. You've learned quickly, smart students. And how has it changed over the last decade? So if we can go to the next slide, because there's a lot of data, put on that another slide. Next one there. There we go. This is the Probation Department budget. Now, look down the middle, there's some blank space. On the right of your screen is JIS, what everybody seems to be focused on today, Juvenile Institution Services. On the left of your screen is the total department. I did that to show you the difference between the two, or what proportion of JIS is in the overall department budget. And I gave you 10 years like you asked for. And I also wanted to comment that all of this I got off the internet. You can get it too. If you go to lacounty.gov, go to departments, click on CEO, click on budgets, and pick the year you want. Page down the bottom and pick the year you want. They're all there. I think it goes back like 20 years. So yeah, I did all this. I typed every number you see on that page. So you can see the change in the size of the budget over the 10 years from 2013-14 to the coming year. And of course, the coming year has not yet happened yet. So this is the projection, not yet approved. Also, this is what we call the recommended budget amount. There's several budget amounts. I'm not trying to confuse anybody, but the budget gets little tweaks between the recommended budget, the final budget that and then July 1 comes along, and then the supplemental budget, which occurs in September. The supplemental budget is to make up for things that we don't know about in the economy that may have impacted us now, because remember, the budget preparation starts in December for the July 1 coming fiscal year. It also is for anything we didn't know about in the state's budget. You know, the governor submits a budget in late January, then he does a May revise. So anything that trickles down to us, good or bad, we don't know that. And then any fund balance that occurs at the end of the year. And I know there's questions about fund balance coming up from this group as well. So anyway, this is the recommended budget. Those tweaks I mentioned and final changes in supplemental are generally not very large as a percentage of the whole. So this is to give you a pretty accurate reflection of what happened over the course of 10 years. I want to point out that I gave you the percentage change per year. So the bottom line there for 13-14 doesn't have a percentage indicator, because percentage is the two numbers that are side by side going bottom up on the page. So it's year over year changes. The average change in the department's budget over the 10 years was 2.5%. Actually, only 9 years are used because there's 9 different. I'd have to use 11 years to get 10 years. It's a math thing. So 2.5% change average per year for the department, 2.43% average for the juvenile institutions budget. Overall CPI, that's the Consumer Price Index, and I use the Urban Consumer Price Index. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not quite sure because I'm not a statistician, but it was 3.1%. So what does that mean? The department and JIS grew at a slower rate than the average Consumer Price Index. So that's what you see on this page. Now, you asked for S&EB and S&S, so that's on the next page. If we can go to that. Hope it's on the next page. I'm doing this from memory. There it is. Okay. This is just Juvenile Institution Services, and for those that on the call that don't know what that means, that's generally halls and camps. There's some other things in there, including transportation and a few other functions, and the folks that support halls and camps. So this is the budget again for 10 years, oldest to newest, bottom to top. The number of staff, I put that in to show you perspective and to show you how the staff changed over the years. You can see some big reductions beginning around 2020, 2021, or 2019, 2020, actually. Those big reductions are due to various things such as hiring freeze, the loss of the Title 40 waiver, and so on. We did something, and I arrived in 2018. I found out the Title 40 waiver was going away. Nobody told me. But so that was what I was faced with when I walked in the door. And we froze hiring in order to generate savings so we could cut those positions for the coming fiscal year in order to offset the loss of the Title 40 waiver. If we had not done that, we potentially would have had to lay people off. So we believe that was a very judicious thing to do because it saved jobs. We didn't have to hire people that otherwise would have got laid off, and it offset the loss of the Title 40 waiver. And again, Title 40 waiver loss was over 2 county fiscal years because the federal fiscal year is different. So some of those losses were in, I think, 1920, and the remainder were in 2021. We also had several hiring freezes along the way. I don't have the dates in front of me. And COVID hit in 2020, 2021, actually 2019, 2020 is where it started. And then the big hit was in 2020, 2021. So this is the salaries and employee benefits. This is the services and supplies. Services and supplies are the things that we buy. Services and commodities that we buy. Salaries and benefits are your paycheck plus anything else that goes with it, whether it's retirement, workers' comp, vacation time, all that sort of stuff. So there it is. And if we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. Now, someone asked, I forget who, but said, what's the reality of this budget? Because there's all this stuff going on. There's all these moving parts. And by the way, there's a lot of moving parts. And I was saying before the meeting started to some folks, sometimes I think I oversimplify things, and I do that to provide clarity. But then people ask me questions or they draw conclusions that I have to come back and say, well, wait a minute, you got to consider this factor or that factor. There's a lot of moving parts. I don't want to sound confusing, and I don't want to talk like an accountant unless you are an accountant, okay? And everybody's bright at something, but some people aren't accountants, just like some people aren't doctors and some people aren't DSOs. So we all do something different. And I try not to talk like an accountant, but I'm happy to dig into that if anybody wants to. So I use this as an example. These are the major variances that occurred at the end of calendar year 2020, 2021. I can't use this year because the year's not over yet. So this shows you where we varied from budget. Big salary savings, $53.5 million. That's because of vacancies. Okay. Now, I mentioned in the last presentation of POC that we do hold vacancies in order to generate savings to pay for the services and supplies that we're underfunded for. And then why are we underfunded? Because, for example, utility costs go up, but we don't get an increase in our budget to pay for those increases. We're expected to absorb it. And there's other costs. Food goes up. Everything goes up. Office supplies go up. Gasoline goes up. As those things go up, we have to find a way to pay for it. Otherwise, we'll go broke. So salary savings are a way of generating that. But most salary savings are not for that purpose. Because the salary savings you need is a few $1 million. And it takes about, I don't know, 8 or 9 people to make up $1 million when their benefits are all factored in and everything. So it's not a huge amount, and I think it was overinflated in the way I portrayed it last time. Most of that salary savings is due to hiring delays or deliberate hiring freezes. This is 2021, so there were freezes across the board in the county because of COVID. Also, if we don't have enough people to staff the juvenile halls, we can't release them to other jobs in the department. People are hired at the entry level into a juvenile hall, either a GSN or DSO item, and I'm sorry for all the acronyms. They're hired in the juvenile hall for that. They can then promote to a deputy probation officer in camp. They can then promote to they can stay in camp or promote again, and they can stay in the halls and promote as well. But they can also promote, so it goes halls to camp and then camp to field. Okay? That's generally the way the progression works. And you can go the other way at higher levels to supervisor items and so on and manager items. But that's the basic progression. So the juvenile halls will not release staff to promote until they have new hire staff coming in to backfill those vacancies. And the camps then won't release to the field until they have people coming up from the halls to fill vacancies for the folks they release. They have to do that because we have staffing ratios we have to meet. So that's why the vacancies occur. When we have a freeze on hiring, everything stops. So the halls can't release to the camps can't release to the field, and we have these field generators. And you might say, boy, now you got $53 million. But look down that same page at the negative $74 million. That's revenue losses. That more than offset the salary savings. Because a lot of those field positions are revenue offset, which means, for example, if you work in the AB 109 program, we claim your costs, your salary and benefit costs against AB 109 and get reimbursed. If their position is vacant, There's no cost to claim. There's no reimbursement. That's revenue foregone. Okay, the revenue sits in the trust fund that's managed by, I believe, the CEO, so or the auditor controller. So you can't take one line item on here and draw conclusions from it. Each one potentially impacts another. So that the 53.5 million is vacancies, the revenue 74 million loss is largely because of slow hiring. I mentioned a few other things in the parentheses there. COPS, that means cost of probation services. That was the loss of COPS revenue, which was the cost that was charged to adult clients as part of the fines and fees process, which has been eliminated, and we reversed all that. And fines and fees is also in there. COPS is the cost of the service. Fines and fees is court-imposed fines and fees, and that we can no longer collect. I skipped a bunch there. Services and supplies. I actually have a list here. Net surplus of $18.8 million. That means we didn't spend all the services and supplies because of purchasing freezes caused by COVID. The county did not know what was going to happen to the economy. Other charges, that's things like care of court wards. I just put the word court wards. Other charges we pay for kids who are in placement. That pays for them, and also pays for things like rents and leases, and there's other things. So smaller amount, 3.9 million. Capital assets, any asset worth over a certain amount, I think it's 5 million or 10 million is considered a capital asset and has to be separately recorded in the accounting records. That's accounting laws nationwide. So that's what that means, just 900,000 there. Interfund transfers, that's money that's transferred between departments. If we get reimbursed or we reimburse somebody else, that's the ISDs and Public Works and Auditor Controller and Treasurer Tax and HR, all of them. Everybody bills each other. There's interdepartmental billing process. We don't do much of it because we have nobody else to bill. But we had people who worked the elections, and the registrar recorder reimbursed us for those election workers for their time that they were away, for their salary. That's not just probation, that's countywide. The county uses a lot of its employees to service polling places and do other election-related work. So that's what that 0.8 million is. And the last one, commitment cancellations, CARES Act, blah, blah, blah. Another quiz, what's a commitment? A commitment is a purchase order or contract that rolled over from one year to the next, and you have an obligation to spend. So if we're purchasing something and it hasn't arrived yet, or we already have an obligation to pay for it, and the fiscal year ends, well, we carry over the money in what's called a commitment. So it's held for that specific purchase, okay? And what this means is the purchase somehow got canceled, so we release the money, it goes back to the CEO, back to what we call the general fund, to get reallocated somewhere else. So all this is a standard part of accounting. You roll over the purchase order or the contract from one year to the next, pending the arrival of whatever it is you were in the process of purchasing. At some point along the way, you didn't use it, cancel it. Sometimes it's not canceling everything. Maybe you wanted 10 of something, you only got 8, you said that's enough, stop. And the rest of the money goes back to the general fund. The CARES Act money, that's money that came in for COVID, in response to COVID. CARES Act and other types of COVID relief that was provided by the federal government. So that was a lot. I said it real fast, and we'll move on to the next slide. All right. Somebody asked about the repair costs at Central Juvenile Hall, and I know there's going to be a question. I anticipated about the 4.6 million at the bottom. But this is the basic craft categories that are going on at Central Juvenile Hall because of the move of the youth from Central to Barry J. And this is what we're trying to get done. This is what we've done as of April 20th, while the kids are out, because it's easier to work on the facility when they're not there, because you don't have to move the kids from building to building and so on. So that's what's going on here. It's kind of self-explanatory, but I need to explain the 4.6 million. No, it says miscellaneous. I wanted to be transparent, as always, about what the answers I give to what you ask. We already had some stuff in progress unrelated to the kids' move. That's the 4.6 million that I'm talking about there, and that's paying for HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and roofing work that was in progress. Some of that 4.6 million was spent before, and some of it was spent during the kids being gone. And some will probably lapse over to afterwards. But it's money that we have spent, and I just want you to see it there. That's what's going on. So if you want to subtract the 4.6 from the almost 5.2, ends up being, I guess, close to $600,000 that we spent since the kids are gone on these sorts of projects. One more thing I want to say, this is not all we spent on projects, because when our staff do the work, this is work that's paid to other county departments or contractors to do. When our staff, we have like light maintenance staff, when they do the work, that's not captured on here. They fill out a time card and so on, but we don't have what's called a job costing system. So if we have a staff who replaces a faucet and does a little cement work and does a little flooring, that cost doesn't get captured here because that's just a timekeeping process for them. Departments that do external billing for their services like ISD and Public Works, they would have a cost for every single hour, sort of like a lawyer or accountant billing for their time. Well, they do that because they have to bill their customers. We have no customers, so we don't track it that way. And if we can move on to the next slide. Oh, that was my last one. So I'll open up the question or whatever the next, if Anna's going to go or whoever's there.
Yeah, I'll take it from here for now, Mr. Smythe. Thank you for your presentation. I think we'll move on to Ms. Han Wong. She'll proceed by sharing the CEO's budget approval process with a specific focus on probation department, on the department, and some recent trends. I believe we're going to start by sharing a video. So if we could get that prepared, that would be great. A link will also be provided in the chat.
Vice Chair Jackson, as they're pulling that up, I just wanted to note that Commissioners Meredith and Lewis joined very early on in Mr. Smythe's presentation, are both here.
Great. Hello, Commissioner Meredith and Commissioner Lewis.
Good evening.
So yes, we'll hear from Ms. Han Wong now.
Well, actually, I wanted to have the video played. This was also used in our county budget that was approved recently on April 19th. And it gives a really quick and very detailed overview on the county budget process from start to finish. So I would like to play the video first and then answer questions that you may have or give a kind of general overview of probation's budget over the past couple of years, if that's what you're interested in.
Los Angeles County is the nation's largest municipal government, with more residents than most states, and a multi-billion-dollar budget that's bigger than that of Kansas, Montana, and Vermont combined. We work all year long to build a budget that meets the needs of our 10 million residents. Here's a look inside the process. We start in January, when county departments submit their budget proposals to the CEO. The CEO evaluates those proposals and makes recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. State law requires the county to always balance its budget. And just as with the household budget, that means making hard choices based on how much funding is available. County funding comes primarily from three sources: federal, state, and locally generated revenues like property and sales taxes. Most of this money is restricted to support specific programs that the county is legally required to provide, like public health care, assistance to children and families, keeping our communities safe, and running fair and accessible elections. The budget also funds culture, education, and recreation, including world-class museums and beaches, an expansive park system, and an extensive network of community libraries. It also supports programs to address some of our toughest social problems and sets aside rainy day funds to keep services running when times get tough. It's all guided by the policy vision of the Board of Supervisors, including strong commitments to anti-racism, equity, and social justice. These values, established through a set of board-directed priorities, shape the recommended budget, which the CEO submits to the board for consideration in mid-April. In May, the board holds public hearings so that residents and other stakeholders can voice their opinions on the budget. Next comes the adopted budget, which is traditionally approved by the board before June 30th. And finally, the supplemental budget in October to incorporate state, federal, and other allocations. Once approved, the county's final adopted budget becomes its spending plan. That's a quick snapshot. For more information, visit ceo.lacounty.gov and click on the Budget tab.
I had to unmute, but that was in a nutshell, the video process, the county budget process. And probation department has been my budget for probably the last 10 years or so. And probation is made up of not just juvenile, but the adult population as well. So it's one budget that serves two different populations. And I know the probation oversight and many of the advocates have been interested in the juvenile population. And the juveniles, based on trends, it has gone down from over 2,000 in the early 1920s, or not 1920, in the early 2019, we probably were at 1,400, and now we're almost like 400. So probation has worked on closing some of their facilities, Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall was closed in 2019, I believe. And then we've closed camps as well. We've had originally, I think, 19 camps, and right now we have about 5 operating camps. And the majority of our camps, our cost savings are staffing, as Robert Smythe spoke about. And some of these positions we did freeze in concert with probation because there was revenue programs like Title 4E that expired in September of 2019 that we had to balance the budget because the waiver program was going away. A good example was that we would lose about almost 20 million in revenue. And rather than ask Mother County to backfill that revenue, which means replacing the revenue, probation got ahead of the game by freezing positions that were allocated to Los Padrinos when people left or transferred out. Instead of hiring, we froze those positions so those could be deleted to we call it self-fund our revenue loss. So instead of asking more money to replace the revenue, probation deleted positions to delete the revenue that was no longer available for the probation department to rely on. Other things that probation has been working on is, of course, the Cal DOJ settlement. They have not really asked for additional funding. They have been able to self-fund by using their own savings to pay for things. They have the grievance kiosk that was approved in the budget either last year or I think it was last year and this current year actually, and also compensatory education, because these are one-time costs. And because they're one-time costs, the department can plan for it and budget ahead of time. The other thing that has been a priority for the probation department is CCTV, closed caption television. Central Juvenile Hall was our first major project, and that came up back in February of 21 last year. So that one is up and running. The next 2 major priorities is Barry J. Nidar for cameras and Dorothy Kirby Center. There is also a plan to have cameras at our camps, but of course our camps, we may have them open, we may close them. So we are very judicious in thinking in our planning to make sure where we place the cameras that it's going to be a camp that's still going to be operating. So there is possibility if population continues to go down that we will close another camp, and we would not want the county to put money toward a camp or facility that may not remain open. I think that's about the most or the basic overview for probation's budget for the last few years. We are doing a staffing analysis. I know people have asked about staffing for probation. So when we do close camps or we look at our camps or our halls, we are conducting a staffing analysis to ensure that there is sufficient staff. Because when the budget was developed, it was developed many, many years ago. And that staffing model might have been different back then versus how it operates now, because there are new requirements required by the SEC that governs the Title 15 or by DOJ. So we are looking at staffing to ensure that there is sufficient. So some of the closed camps or positions that were frozen, we may reallocate them to where the need is. When we closed Los Padrinos, we used it to backfill or to replace some of the staff that we were short in some of the camps. We call it right sizing. Maybe the staffing that was budgeted wasn't correct, so we had to add additional positions. Rather than add new positions, we moved it from one unit to another to ensure there was sufficient staffing. If there wasn't a need for the excess staffing, then the probation would either delete it to self-fund things like revenue loss or increase costs or pay for increased costs, as Mr. Smythe talked about, like service and supplies that may have increased or additional one-time costs that we needed additional funding for. So I think that's about all I have to say about budget, unless someone has specific questions regarding county budget overall.
Thank you, Anna. All of that information was really helpful. We're going to save some space a little later for commissioners to address post your presentation and ask any questions that they have. I did want to ask a question, and I really appreciate the video. I think it provided sort of a high level overview of what the approval process is like. Some of us don't have a whole lot of insight into what that full process looks like. Do you have any more information about what maybe the budget submission process looks like before it even gets to the board for approval?
The department usually starts working on the budget usually in October to December. That's a cycle for departments to work within their units to ask for what the priority requests are, and departments start submitting the budget on a flow basis. There's different due dates for the budget submission by departments, and that's usually due in January. And once the CEO budget analyst receives it, we'll take a look at it, do an analysis, we'll meet with our internal CEO management to go over the priorities requested by departments. And based on the information provided to the CEO will work with the board offices to see where their priorities are, because every department has their own mission and their own requests and everything else. Then the CEO will make a recommendation, and that is usually done in April for the recommended budget. Final changes is usually done by late June. It's presented to the board in late June, and is an opportunity for departments to refine the budget request that was approved and recommended, or there are some things that we didn't have enough information we might have deferred. So we would review it and relook at it in final changes. And then the last budget cycle is supplemental changes, and that is usually approved in late September, if not early October. And that one will also include the state budget, because the state budget is usually given in early January, but it's preliminary. And then you have the May revise, but that is just a revision. And then in June is when the state decides on the budget, and things may have changed from revise. So those changes will be incorporated in supplemental. And in supplemental, we also have year-end closing, which is normally in late August. So there are some, we will have the balance, we will have the budget, and there may be some requests of unspent funding where departments have savings, and they may request it to be carried over to the next fiscal year. They may have had projects that they had planned and budgeted, but the project won't be completed to the next year. So that is also considered in supplemental changes. Supplemental changes also incorporates the excess year-end fund balance. When county departments have savings at year-end, the savings can be considered as one-time funds available to fund one-time needs, high priority projects and things like that. And that is also part of supplemental changes.
Okay, thank you for that. It actually answered another question that I had. I think we'll move on to Nicole Brown. Nicole doesn't have any content to share with us, right? We're just going to have a bit of a dialogue here. Is that right? Okay, I just want to be sure.
Presentation, correct.
Okay, great.
So the report that you mentioned, by the way, at the beginning that Nicole did is attached to the agenda for anyone who'd like to refer to it.
Okay, great. Thanks, Wendy. Nicole, would you like to add anything based on what we've heard so far from the community perspective?
I guess I have a lot I could say, but I'm wondering if you're just asking me in like what we just heard, or was there specific questions that you wanted me to answer?
I have a very specific question coming up. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to respond to maybe some things you've already heard.
Sure. I mean, I guess one major question I had was just, I mean, I was looking to dig in and understand a little bit more what Mr. Smythe showed around the underspending in salaries and benefits, and then the $70 million loss in revenue, just because I was looking at the recommended budget. It feels like it doesn't show a $70 million loss in revenue. And I guess the county, if you look at the actual versus adopted to actual budget over many years by budget units and also by probation as a whole, there seems to be consistent underspending between 15 to $77 million in the last, 5 or 6 years. So I guess I was, I have questions or love to hear more around like, where is that loss in revenue reflected in the budgets? And why, if, I guess that was something that just came to my mind, wanting to learn more and understand it more. But whenever so that's it. But I'm happy to also talk about, since we had limited time last time, if folks had specific questions that they wanted me to answer or just reflect on, I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Yes,
Did you want
great.
me to
Thank you
answer
so
that
much.
one? Should I go ahead?
I think we're gonna have her answer a question and then we'll circle back to you
No
too,
problem.
because that's actually an answer that myself and I'm sure other commissioners want to hear as well. So Nicole, I'd like to know what your take is from an advocacy perspective on the proposed budget, right? In particular, probation's budget, their money for youth justice reimagined plans, and how that might align or not with some of the goals
Sure.
of those reform efforts.
I guess one of my biggest, takeaways is in the last few years and seeing this budget again is that, there is just, I guess, this stuck on the status quo. That's what I see. I want to read back. I looked up the, motion of November 24th, 2020, when the board unanimously passed the motion to endorse the plan for Youth Justice Reimagine, which is a 5-year plan that's supposed to end in 2025 to wind down juvenile probation and create the Department of Youth Development. And in that motion, Directive 4C directs the CEO's office, along with, a list of others, they directed them to create a proposal to establish a reserve revenue, or PFU, that reflects a direct correlation between standing up a new Department of Youth Development and the gradual wind down of the Probation Department's juvenile budget, with the objective of making an initial investment of $75 million in DYD in fiscal year 21-22. And, we went through a big fight, I guess, and shock, honestly, when this motion was unanimously passed by the board. And last recommended budget, when the CEO was asked by reporters why there was no money reflected for Youth Justice Reimagined, a new DYD, or even just augmentation to YDD, or any other funding to be able to start to do all of the ambitious plans that we've been working on for years. There was $0 reflected in that budget, and it was referred to being premature. So since that time, we've been planning with the Youth Justice Advisory Groups for a whole other year around a lot of different implementation plans. There was some funding allocated last year after a lot of advocacy, an additional $17.3 million to YDD for expanded diversion, some AB 109 dollars to YDD as well, and $27.9 million for the Youth Justice Reimagined Development Fund. And those are great, and we're happy to see it. It still doesn't get us to $75 million. In another year has fully passed, and because of bureaucratic challenges, YDD has been slow to expand, and we haven't seen a single dollar go to any new programs for youth in this whole other year that we've been, and we've just continued to plan, and we still don't see any money in the recommended budget for the new Department of Youth Development. And the board just passed a motion, kind of re-acknowledging that they would like to launch the department by July 1st, 2022. So it is, of great concern to us, and I say us, a member of the Los Angeles Youth Uprising Coalition and many other youth advocates who've been working on this really, really hard for many years. And, I read that motion because we really do see this, it's a winding down and a building up. And if we have made those plans and 2 budget years are now circling by, and we see probation's budget staying exactly the same and actually growing last year, there was more funding given to probation because of the Department of Justice settlement agreement. And unfortunately, the conditions in our halls have only gotten much worse. And so we really want to see us try to do something different, and have been planning for years to try to do something different, but we do not see anything changing. And that is I mean, we're going to keep trying, but it's disheartening, I guess. And we need to see actual change so that the words of the motions and that we see around change we want to see are actually backed up with resources. Because if not, nothing's ever going to change. So that's some of my initial response. And I guess I will also want to shout out to the Probation Oversight Commission and say that I would hope in this budget, once it's passed, that you all receive more resources so you can, have what you need because you play a really important role in all of this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nicole. Since your question was one about alignment, I wanted to just take an opportunity to ask, I'm not sure if it's someone from the CEO's office or otherwise, but about this launch of the Justice Care and Opportunities Department. I don't know much about that initiative, and if maybe you guys could give us some background about that, we can sort of establish some parallels and maybe some conflicts between department goals and reform goals.
There was a board motion on to create the Justice Care Opportunities Department. And that was, I'm not as familiar with it, but that was more on the new, I guess, justice that's outside of public safety. I believe programs such as reentry programs sponsored by ODR will move into this new department. The alternatives for incarceration, which is within the CEO's office, as well as JCIT, which is the Jail Closure Implementation Team, will also merge into JCOD as well. Probation's pretrial services, which has been discussed as moving out of probation and also in Justice Care Opportunities Department. So functions that are presently served in different departments or different agencies will now transfer and transition to the new Justice Care and Opportunities Department. It's a lot of acronyms, but that is what the hope is, and then it will build out from there, is my understanding of it.
Okay. I see that in that presentation that you guys sort of borrowed our care first language, right? So it's care first, jails last. I guess there is some concern, and I'll move on to commissioner comments next, about maybe important fundings for perhaps YDD will be rerouted into the departments in this Justice Care and Opportunities Department. Maybe that's something that we can explore a little bit later, but for myself, maybe even other commissioners, there may be real cause for concern that our initiatives won't be fully funded because of the existence of this new, or because of the establishment of this new department.
Vice Chair Jackson,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that there is some information that CEO Davenport and the rest of the CEO's office presented on the creation of the two new departments, or actually 4 new departments established, but 2 new that are related to our work that I'll be happy to share with the commissioners that describe a little bit of that, which includes some of the work that Nicole was describing that the youth justice work groups have done. And it might be appropriate to have an update from some of those youth justice work groups for the POC to understand how those work together, because it certainly was the intent of the motion to ensure that all of the oversight is included in both the adult level oversight, like the Sheriff's Civilian Oversight Commission, and the POC on the adult side, as well as on the youth side in both of the JCOD department and the Department of Youth Development. So I think that's a great idea to have an update on the structures of those, because that's both a CEO's office celebration in the budget. I mean, it's in the press release and everything, but also something that the youth justice work groups have been sharing much more robustly in terms of actual tangible plans. So I will be certain to work with Chair Carrillo and you to put that on an agenda so we can get a straight story about what the plans are.
Great. Thanks so much. I think it's a good time to hear from other commissioners. I was going to start with some comments, but I think since in part this meeting is a continuation from our last meeting where they're looking to get some specific questions answered, I really want to allow them a real opportunity for that. And so if other commissioners want to jump in with questions, I think now is a good time. Don't all raise your hands at once. All right. Commissioner Garcia Lay, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, thanks. So it was, I believe some of my questions are my desire at the last meeting to really pick some numbers that we could all use collectively that led to the question about how have things changed over the last 10 years. So Mr. Smythe, I appreciate that very clear set of numbers, the 10 years that you broke down. You said you got the numbers off the web. So either I was confused before or I'm confused now, I think, because where that question was coming from was at the last meeting, Ms. Brown presented some numbers that looked very much like those same numbers and was making the point, if you compare our population to those budget numbers, it seems difficult to accept that we spent that much with that fewer number of young people, that something is out of whack. To which I understood you as saying, well, you know, if you take into account supplemental budget numbers and the actual spending versus those numbers, that those aren't the best numbers to use because they don't reflect the actual amount of money that was spent. Those were budgets that were at the beginning of the year that were, I understood as, I think, recommended budgets. And yet the numbers you've given us today, it also says are recommended budget numbers. So if we're trying to understand and capture the trends of how has spending changed compared to the population we're serving, so that we could divide them and come up with a simple number of how much are we spending per kid per year, or understanding that kids move out per bed per year, let's say. Are those the numbers we should be using? Or are those not?
We can certainly do that. It's a little bit more challenging to gather up that information. It's just more places I got to point and click to, but it can be done. And as I mentioned, all that's available on the internet. Same place I mentioned. It's just the way it's structured on the internet is a little bit different, but we certainly can do that. I don't think there's going to be a material difference in the outcome that you're looking for or in the result that you're looking for. The budget is the plan. There are things that are unanticipated, such as COVID, unanticipated and anticipated. There's COVID issues that are obviously unanticipated. There's the waiver going away, which was anticipated. And then there's things like hiring freezes, which we did not know about. Those hiring freezes, again, clog up the system. I want to bring up one other point, and that is every vacancy is not the same. And that seems like a silly thing to say. But what I mean by that is some vacancies have revenue behind them. They are entirely or partially supported by some grant program or funding source like the state that pays for them. So when you cut the position, when the position is vacant. When the position is vacant, you're not incurring salary expenses, so you're saving money. But you also lose the revenue that you claim against it, so you lose the revenue. So the net gain is zero. Unless if it's partially funded, let's say it's 50% funded, then the net gain is 50%. So not every position is the same. There are also positions that are 100% what people call county funded, net county cost funded. There you do save. You also have to look at positions not being equal because of the function that they perform. They have to be there, for example, to meet the staffing ratios in juvenile hall, or if they're not there, a caseload size gets much larger. So again, it's not a generic apples and apples comparison. Look at one vacancy versus another, or one filled position for another. It depends on revenue, depends on the function they perform. So back to your original question about spending, we can certainly look at the 10-year, we can do the same chart and do it with actuals if necessary, if that'll add value.
Well, I don't know if it will add value, and I certainly don't want to make work when it's not necessary. My issue was I was looking at these slides that Ms. Brown presented, and they looked good to me, but then I heard that, well, be careful using those. Those might not be the best numbers to use. But then when we asked you the same question, you came up with what I think are the same numbers that we were looking at last time that I understood you as criticizing. So I'm happy to use those numbers. I just want consensus and some leadership, not leadership, your expertise. Are those numbers good enough? If I want to make a slide that shows the number of youth going down and the number of spending going up, those are the numbers I should use?
You can do that. But then you have an accounting issue, and that is we have fixed costs that don't change regardless of the number of kids in there. And as I mentioned in the previous meeting, we have closed facilities that we're still paying for. Now, the cost we're paying for is less, but we have fixed maintenance and security costs. Everything, it's kind of silly, but it's to make you remember, we have to clean the pools. If you let the pool go fallow, so to speak, then you ruin the pool. We mow the grass, not only because it needs to be mowed, but because for the neighborhood around it to make sure the place doesn't come unsightly. We have to provide security guards at facilities so they don't get vandalized. We also have to do pest control at these facilities. We have to go by once in a while and run the faucets and flush the toilets to keep the pipes from drying out at a hot place like Challenger. So things like that have to be done. And those costs don't go away. And I've used the phrase, and I hate to sound like an economist in this case, I've used the phrase economies of scale. The more kids in a facility, the less the cost per kid. That just makes common sense with most people. But as as the population drops, the fixed costs never change. It's the marginal cost, the cost for every additional kid that changes, every additional or every lesser kid that changes. At some point, you reach the floor of marginal costs, and all you have left is fixed costs, but those don't go away. We are not allowed to walk away from a facility.
What I want to make sure we don't confuse is what is happening and what are the reasons for what is happening. So I think first, I just want clarity over what is happening, and your table, which looks very closely like what Ms. Brown presented before to me, is what's happening. That's great. Now, why is that happening? Okay, understand fixed costs, the revenue, those are all explanations for why those two lines, spending and population, don't line up. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. I recognize that the explanations can become very detailed, and while there's a million reasons, some are more important than others and have a bigger effect than others. So I understand all that. But setting aside those explanations for why those two lines are going in opposite directions, I'm happy now that I think we have agreement over the fact that those two lines are going in opposite directions, and we've got some numbers we can use to graph those out and have some common language about that. Okay, so that was my question or my confusion, and I think you helped me with that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Commissioner Garcia Lay. If you could lower your hand and raise it again if you have more feedback, that'd be great. Moving on to Commissioner Nong.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the presentations. I actually have two questions. I don't know if it's easier to ask them both in the beginning, but I think for the sake of time, I will ask them both. And I'm going to, again, ask for your patience because, Mr. Smythe, like you said, all our brains work differently. Can't say I'm a numbers person, but I've tried my best. I've read what I could. So my first question is actually just circling back on something that Ms. Brown noted before. And what I heard her say is that for the past two budget years, even after there were stated commitments by the Board of Supervisors to fund Youth Justice Reimagined, including specifically a Department of Youth Development, why the numbers have remained unchanged and why the CEO's office did not actually allocate money for this. So that's my first question, is if you could explain it, because I think we'd all would want to hear why that is versus just the statement that it was premature. So a little bit more detail as to why would be great. My second question, and this is where it's a clear lack of understanding, is about the vacancies. And I'm looking at the number, you mentioned the 53.5 million salary savings for vacancies, and you said for fiscal year 2021, and that was due to hiring delays or deliberate freezes. And comparing those numbers to the frozen and vacant positions from the December 2020 Auditor Controller's report in your response. And I guess I'm trying to understand right now, and I asked this before the meeting, actually, if you could explain how many vacant positions, whether you're expecting or have been line item for this upcoming fiscal year, and what you actually plan to do with those. Are they going to stay vacant? Are you going to try to fill them? And also frozen as well. Those two questions make sense, especially the second one.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for mentioning that Auditor Control report. I saw you flip on the pages there. I want all of you and everybody on this call to read it. including the response that's attached. I'm the one that sent it to the POC so they can send it to all of you, because it really provides a high-level document you can refer back to about how the basic budget process works and what occurred during the time period that the Auditor Controller looked at. But again, also read the response, because it's very educational about how interdepartmental billing works, especially the last page. And I don't have it in front of me, but the reason I know is I wrote it. And I tried to make it educational and not sound wonky. So please, please, please read it. Good for you. The second thing is you asked about the CEO allocating money for U-Test Reimagine. That's not a question I can answer. That's a budget question for the board or the CEO. My understanding, just from what I hear indirectly, is that there was money allocated for Youth Justice Reimagine or some purpose like that. There's different phrases used like YDD or this JCOD as it's called. But I don't know. That happens at the Hall of Administration, not in Downey. Probation headquarters is in Downey for those on the call that don't know. The third question you asked was about vacancies. We don't budget for vacancies. Okay? That's maybe something I didn't make clear during my presentation today and the last time. Okay? We budget for a certain number of people and a certain number of functions because the CEO does not allow departments to budget extra money. All the money that we're going to spend, that we intend to spend, is in that budget. What we don't know, okay, is how much, again, we can't take expenditures and revenues in isolation from one another. What we don't know is how many vacancies we're going to have. We certainly can put our thumb up in the air and give an estimate, but we want to fill those positions. For example, I mentioned many of those positions vacant are in the field. Many of those field vacancies are revenue or partially or fully revenue offset. We intend to fill those, but we can't if the halls won't release people. So if staff can't promote up because the halls can't release them, understandably so, because they have staffing ratios to achieve, then that creates vacancies in camp. So if camp won't release, and then that creates vacancies in field. The way the union agreements are structured and the hiring process is structured is people come in from halls to camp to field. There is a little bit of movement going the other way or across, so to speak, in the levels of supervisor, for example, because you can promote, let's say, deputy probation officer in camp, you can promote to supervisor in the hall, or deputy probation officer in the field, you can promote to supervisor in the hall or camp, or vice versa. But at the line level, GSN, I'm going up the food chain here, GSN, DSO, senior DSO, DPO 1 and DPO 2, the flow moves hall, camp, field most of the time. There might be a few exceptions I'm thinking at the moment. So if we have vacancies in anywhere, field, camp, whatever, well, they have staffing ratios in camps and halls, we intend to fill those. Some of those will be offset by revenue, some of them will not. The intent is to fill them. If we can't fill them, then in some cases we don't realize the revenue, so the net gain to us and the county, the net savings to us and the county is zero. If those positions are fully or partially net county costs, general fund dollars, what the press calls locally generated revenues, then there would be savings. And those savings at the end of the year, if we have a surplus, roll back to the CEO to be reallocated to other county needs. That's what's called the year-end budget surplus. Okay? So we don't budget for vacancies, we budget to spend it all. There is no slush fund in any county department for that sort of thing. By the way, there was another question you asked about was it a budget unit that was underspending? I forgot what it was. I hate to jump to that, but I thought of it at the moment. But anyway, that budget unit is the CDPP anti-gang funding. We don't control that money. It's in our budget because we let the contracts, the RFPs and the contract, actually not RFPs, we're the ones that create the contracts for those, but those choices are made by the board, not us. It's their money to spend, it just resides in our budget. So it doesn't mix with our operating budget.
I'm going to ask for clarity and apologize that I'm slower to catch this, I think. So
it was your question number 5.
You mentioned that there are vacancies and a lot of them are fields.
Yep.
So it sounds like you described this whole chain. So
Yep.
let's say it's step 2. So if you want to fill in the field, let's say 10, I'm going to make a small number. You have to wait for 10 staff to be promoted from the halls, right? So for that to happen, do you need to hire 10 more people to fill the halls before they get released?
Yes.
So
In general,
essentially your
speaking in general, yes. People can move from juvenile field to adult field. They can go sideways, so to speak. But so there's very little movement up the food chain, up the organizational chain. I hate to use that word food chain. It sounds demeaning. I don't mean it that way. But up the organizational chain, there's very little movement if we're not hiring. And we have not hired in a while. So it has ground to a halt, and that's why the number of vacancies gradually grows. March is retirement season for a lot of county employees because they get a cost of living wage April 1st if they're retired by the end of March. So we just experienced the retiring surge that all departments experience. So we have additional vacancies now that we can't fill until we hire. So your characterization is in general correct. There's always little exceptions.
And so then how do you end up cutting positions? Like if the ratios are, you're at 1 to 3, 1 to 5, 1 to 6, depending on the year, and we decide we don't need to fill those positions, how do we end up cutting those positions while still filling, let's say, vacancies you may need in the field?
Well, for example, we closed Los Virginios Juvenile Hall. Some of those positions went to, some of those people promoted or transferred to other juvenile halls or promoted up to camp, and the camp people then to field. So that's where some of them went. The rest were cut. If you look at the last 5 years of our department, from 2018-19 through the current year, the estimate for the coming year, we cut 1,051 positions. If you just want to talk about juvenile institutions, we cut 763 positions. I'm looking at that 10 years, and I already did the math here. So 763 positions cut out of JIS. That's halls, camps, and anything else that supports halls and camps like transportation. IDC, I think IDC is also part of that. So 763 from the halls and camps. That's a combination of factors, including closures of facilities and cuts elsewhere in the JIS budget. Now, something else I mentioned from the prior presentation, if you cut 1% out of probation budget, that's $1 million. Because our budget's about $1 billion, as you can see on this $1.025 billion. So 1% is roughly $1 million. But also it works the other way. If our employees get let's say a 2% cost of living raise, which we don't provide, we're happy they get it, but that's provided by Mother County through the negotiation process, and I get that, and good. I'm not in any way disparaging that at all. Okay, it's 2% across the board. That's roughly $2 million. Not all our costs are salaries and employee benefits, but just for round number purposes, it's $2 million right there. And then you have all the benefit increases, which I mentioned, like retiree healthcare costs and OPEB costs, that sort of thing. All that goes up. Okay, that all makes the budget go up. Most of our costs are salaries and employee benefits, and that's the same for most county departments. Most of what we do is a service, and most of that service involves people providing the service. So anytime there's a cost increase in salaries and wages, it's a few $1 million for us.
Thank you. I'm going to fall back. I have a million other questions, but I can ask them perhaps at another meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ong. You always ask really great questions. So I just wanted to be mindful and insert some comments. It's 7:17 and the meeting was scheduled to end at 7:30. We obviously value everyone's time, but want to allow all commissioners and public commenters to share thoughts as well. And so just wanted to make a quick note that this is probably going to be extended for about 30 minutes to allow everyone an opportunity to speak. Moving on to Commissioner Lewis.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. So I have a couple of, so first, Mr. Smythe, you said that you referenced Challenger and having to turn on like the water sort of pipes don't dry, et cetera, and you said that you're not allowed to walk away from a facility. So Challenger is one of the facilities. And so when you said that, at the same time, you referenced Las Virginias, that you closed Las Virginias. So my first question is, if you're not allowed to walk away from a facility, how come we can't close Challenger if it's not closed, or any of the other camps that don't have youth on them, and relocate the staff that are there? Because if you close Las Virginias, why can't, which was a major juvenile hall, why can't you close these camps that don't have youth in them? Because if you close Las Virginias, you should be able to close the camps, unless my logic is flawed. So that's question number one. The second question has more to do with these staff vacancy positions and workman's comp, the number of staff. So I was in juvenile hall a few weeks ago, and there was an announcement that visiting would be canceled. And so we went down to speak to the person who was in charge of the facility that day. It was a Saturday. And we inquired why visiting was canceled, and it was because they didn't have enough staff to run visiting. The other thing that I've noticed, and I go in quite often in the Barry J, is that when they don't have enough staffing, youth are not out running around on the grass. When they do have staffing, I see youth out there, but it's not consistent. So my question is, how many staff are out on workman's comp? If these vacant positions or these facilities like Challenger can be closed, can staff be moved there? I'm trying to figure out, the bottom line is this. Let me figure out how to phrase this right. We can't run and Barry J has been cited as well as Central because they're not doing certain things, and what it boils down to on a granular level is they don't have enough staff to do it. But we have staff that are at other facilities doing what if we can't close these facilities and walk away, but we did close Juvenile Hall. And the reason why I'm asking this question is because at the central part of this are the children that are in Juvenile Hall that are suffering, that can't go outside and run around, can't get enough programming, can't go to school because we don't have enough staff to run right now basically one Juvenile Hall. Is it that we have that many vacancies, or are there that many staff that are out on workman's comp? So it's two questions. One, you're not allowed to walk away from a facility, but how can we close Las Padrinas? And then two, how many staff are actually out on workman's comp, and how's this affecting the staffing levels specifically in Barry J right now? I'm trying to be as concise as I can, but it's kind of difficult.
Okay. First of all, I think, I used a poor choice of words when I said we can't walk away. We cannot abandon a facility. Both Challenger and Los Padrinos are closed. There are no youth there. But what I meant by that is we have an obligation to maintain those facilities in good working order. So even though there's no youth there, we still, as I mentioned, simple things like cut the grass and keep the pool clean. We do those as well as provide security. We cannot let them go fallow, is what I should have said, which means let wildlife take it over, so to speak, and the grass grow and the tumbleweeds blow in. Can't do that. There is a small operation at Los Padrinos that is not a probation operation. There's one run, I think it's the 4th district. There's some sort of a young adults program over there. I'm not real familiar with it, so I won't say any more because I don't know the details. I don't want to misquote. So Los Padrinos is closed. Challenger is closed. Munns, Mendenhall, Ralph, Miller, Gonzalez, they're all closed. There are no youth there. Okay, so they're in various conditions. Munns Miller have some other issues due to a mudslide many years ago, but the pool still looks good, and we still maintain those facilities to the extent that we can, and we still provide security for those facilities. Your next question was about staff out on workers' comp, and I think you also asked some questions about staffing the facilities. I can't answer the questions about staffing the facilities and what's going to, that's a question you need to ask the juvenile hall folks. I'm only really prepared to talk about budget. I don't have the numbers of people out on workers' comp right in front of me. We do have people out on workers' comp. That's a unfortunate but understandable outcome of any kind of facility that runs that kind of service. And we do manage those people to the best of our ability to make sure they can recover and come back to work healthy and happy and to full duty. When they can't, there's ways we address that too by looking for other jobs for them and working with them and their doctors on the best plan for them. But I cannot answer your questions about staffing juvenile halls. You have to bring in the juvenile hall people for that.
Okay, one last question.
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis, if I could just add, we have formally requested an answer to that question. So thank you for bringing it up tonight. And it's a good time to invite folks to join our public meeting next Thursday, May 5th, also at 6 p.m., where we will hopefully have the specific answer to that question to be able to talk about it in more detail. So thank you for bringing it up.
Okay, I have one last question. Is there a current hiring freeze for probation staff?
Yes.
And who put that? Did the board of supervisors put that freeze in place?
CEO put that hiring freeze in place, and that's large. It's in part to address the juvenile probation reimagined, or there's other acronyms you can use, so to speak. But they're doing a study, what's called a right sizing study, and Ms. Helm Wong mentioned that briefly, to determine what is the appropriate number of staff based on the number of kids in all of our juvenile facilities, both camps and halls. So the study's not complete yet. They have, they continue to keep us advised of that study, and we're continuing to work with them on what ability we need to fill positions to provide for the supervision of kids in halls and camps.
Can I clarify that during the pandemic, as of March 2020, there was a hard hiring freeze for all departments. In October 2021, all departments' freezes were lifted except for sheriff and probation, but for probation, it was only for juvenile institutions, which are the halls and camps. So those positions are on a hard hiring freeze. To hire any positions for the halls or camps will require CO review and approval.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you all. Commissioner Yamashiro, I see that you lowered your hand. Did you want to retract?
Yeah, no, sorry. I just had a quick question. I think this might be for Mr. Smythe. I'm just curious, do you know whether how that we've talked about all these detention facilities in Los Angeles County, and I was curious, does the county own all those properties outright?
Yeah, I believe they do. And just to give you an example, we're trying to bulldoze Camp Ralph. Camp Ralph has not been open for, I want to say 14 years approximately. It's about $2.5 million to close and bulldoze Camp Ralph because there's toxic soil underneath and you have to get rid of this plumbing, blah, blah, blah. I'm just throwing it out there to give you a sense of what it costs to decommission a facility. And the reason it needs to be bulldozed is it's not habitable. And we have occasional homeless people living in there, and that's not safe or a good environment for them either. So,
Right. So,
throw that out there
okay,
to
so
tell you what we have to pay
we
for.
own all of these detention facilities outright, the County of Los Angeles. You know,
All of our juvenile facilities, the county owns.
all right. So, and I'm curious, do we know whether or not there are any, whether probation owns any other smaller properties that are not necessarily detention facilities? Are you aware of what that inventory is that that probation has oversight over?
There's a division within the CEO called CEO Real Estate, and they keep an inventory of all facilities. I don't know what else there is that the county owns that is smaller.
But what I'm asking is, I mean, is there anything that is kind of within the probation's inventory of like what? Because you guys have field offices, there's certain areas that were, certain parts of courts, that were probation offices, things like that. Are you aware of any of the smaller properties besides our detention facilities that are kind of within the ambit of the probation department's oversight?
We have facilities that are in county buildings that the county owns the building. We are a small part of that building. Courts are a different story. I think that's a state facility. County maintains some of them, but the state owns it. But for example, the Hall of Records, probation has operations of the Hall of Records, but only a small part of it. It's like a 12 or 13-story building, and we're on one floor.
Okay. So last question. So on the this question of Los Padrinos, I know that it was shuttered, but it's been maintained, and it was not shuttered because of some kind of non-compliance with the BSCC, as we had to deal with Central, right? It was fully operational at the time it was vacated, right?
Correct.
Any reason why that you're aware of that instead of sending all of the youth from Central up to Sylmar, why we didn't just send staff to Los Padrinos and house the youth in Los Padrinos?
I'm thinking back to the evacuation of Barry J during the fire, and we sent kids to Los Padrinos. There's definitely some challenges there with sending kids to a facility that has not been opened in a while. There's no food. There's nobody to prepare the food, bedding, clothing, all the things that would need to set up shop for roughly 180 to 200 kids, literally overnight. Barry J had all those things. I also think that the Board of Supervisors had told us not to reoccupy Los Padrinos, not part of that evacuation, but in the past, as mentioned, they don't want us occupying Los Padrinos, and there's a vision among the board to create Los Padrinos into something different. My understanding is it's some sort of multi-use property, I don't know exactly what you call it, like a care facility for people both young and old and others who need supportive care with a combination of on-site mental health and health care and vocational training, that sort of thing. So I think that's the future vision. We also do have that program that's there, not us, but the board has a program that's there now, using the south portion of one building is on the south portion of the facility with a separate entrance from the regular front door. So that's there as well, and you've got that problem with those people there. Good people, but I mean, it's a problem putting kids in there with that operation going on there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for presenting and commissioners for your comments. Wendy, I think we're going to move on to public comment. Instead of doing 3 minutes, I'm recommending that we do 2 for the sake of efficiency. We don't want to, yeah, we just like to reduce it to 2 minutes if we can.
That sounds good. I'd like to encourage you now to raise your hand, use the raise your hand function. It's the little gray icon that you'll see at the bottom of the participant window. Once we have people raise your hands, we will unmute you and you will be able to speak. If you can't figure out how to do it, don't worry, just send a chat to the host and we will figure out how to get you unmuted. If you're calling in, you can also give public comment. You just need to press *3 one time on your phone, and that will actually raise your hand and we'll call you by your phone number. You also are welcome to send in public comments in writing at info@poc.lacounty.gov. If we get them by tomorrow, we will include them in the official documents of this meeting. Le damos la bienvenida. Si quiere hacer su comentario en español, le daremos 4 minutos para la traducción al inglés. Nomás avísenos que prefiere hacer su comentario en español. And as is typical at our town halls, we ask that you introduce yourself if you're willing. Step up and step back, share your thoughts, be respectful of the time to allow as many people to speak as possible. Honor equity and participation, practice grace and openness with each other. And we'll go ahead and put up the 2-minute timer, and we have some hands raised. Thank you. And we will begin with Danita Beauchamp. Welcome, Danita. Give us 1 second to get you unmuted, and you can begin.
Okay, good evening. I'd like to thank everyone for the presentations. It was very informative. As Mr. Smythe said, that there are many things that are not considered that can be factored into the budget. But once we just experienced this pandemic situation, I don't understand why, whether it's the County Board of Supervisors or the CEO's office, wouldn't factor in some kind of money for something that happens, like another pandemic or some other kind of maybe natural disaster of some sort. You're already on a hiring freeze, and what happens when staff is not available? Then, you know, what's going to happen with these facilities? It just can't be, as Mr. Lewis said, that, you know, they weren't even allowed to have visitors, or they weren't allowed to participate in outdoor activities because of the lack of staffing. So another catastrophic event could effectively shut down another location. And then, like Mr. Smythe explained, we're paying for a facility that's closed and no youth are being serviced there. So I'd like to have that question addressed maybe at the next meeting if possible. Thank you.
Actually, Vice Chair Jackson, given the fact that Danita is actually only hand raised, Anna, is that a question you might be able to address about emergency planning and how that works in the budget with the CEO in general?
We do have what we call a rainy day fund that we do set aside a certain dollar amount of our year-end savings to ensure we do have a fund, a savings for things that are catastrophic that we may not anticipate. We do try to plan, CEO. We do a forecast predicting how much things will cost, what things may be more expensive that the county would have to pay for. And then, you know, and then there are unexpected things like when we had the pandemic, we had CARES Act that gave us additional one-time dollars, as well as the ARP. I'm trying to remember what ARP stands for, but it's the American Rescue Plan that also gave us one-time dollars. So we are able to use those funding instead of using our rainy day fund. So, but it's really hard for a county as large as us to pivot so quickly. So there are times when we will do a curtailment. In 2021 budget in final changes, we did do across the board 8% curtailment because of the pandemic, not knowing that we would have, you know, available one-time dollars from the federal government to help us, you know, through the pandemic. So we do try to do that. But when we do any curtailment, it really has an operational impact on departments. When you can predict or estimate that you're going to have a cut, just like the Title 4E, probation was able to plan for that by starting to not fill vacancies, for positions that retired or were vacant. Instead of filling it, they deliberately froze those positions, knowing that they would have to use those positions to offset or to replace revenue that wasn't coming. So things like that are easier to plan when you know about it, but when you have to make adjustments for anything last minute, then it's much harder. The departments normally will have savings by positions, so then you will have to think about what programs that you will cut that are not priorities. For departments that are provide direct services, then that means higher caseloads or fewer people they will be able to see. So those require more planning, and it's hard when you have to do it last minute. But the county does have what we call our rainy day fund or a contingency to weather things such as that. I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate it. Thank you for doing that on the spur of the moment. We have Krista Newbold who has her hand up. Jennifer or who, Ismail, if you could put the screen back up, we'll unmute Krista. You can go ahead and unmute her and she can let her start talking. Not yet. Okay, Krista, you're good to go.
Okay, I have a question for Ms. Hong. Is it Ms. Hong?
Wong?
Oh yeah, Ms. Han Wong, I have a question for you. You stated that the halls and camps require CEO review and approval to hire, right? But then there was a mention of an overall hiring freeze. Does that mean that outside of the halls and camps, they can hire like for adult field or any other thing? Or is that any kind of hiring has to go through the CEO's office? And then my second question is, since you're doing this study, does that mean you're preparing to snatch items?
Okay, the first question is about the hiring freeze. The freeze only impacts the juvenile institutions, which are comprised of the juvenile halls and camps. So those positions, any promotions, any hiring will require CEO approval. All the other units, juvenile field services, administrative support, special services, those are not part of the freeze. So the department has the freedom to hire and promote within those other units or bureaus. And then I'm sorry, what was your second question?
About the salary study. Oh, go ahead, Krista. I didn't realize.
In the study that you're doing, when you're it sounds like you're reviewing items. Are you preparing to reallocate and remove items from the probation department?
It's similar to a study that the CEO conducted back in 2018, 2019, when we collapsed quite a few camps. When we collapsed camps, we also looked at what ratios should the camps have, because some of them were short, some of them had excess. So depending on what the analysis that our team is doing, it will tell us whether some locations will need more staff, and then those that have excess, we will transfer it to those units. And then those that have too many and we don't need, then those will be subject to possibly curtailment, or possibly what the department sometimes does is right size other units that may not have enough staff. They may add a position here by self-funding and deleting an existing position that's vacant. Or they would possibly curtail or cut the positions to fund other shortages or other things that they may need, the revenue may need, I call it appropriation for. If our revenue is still lopsided, where we have revenue that we know that's not coming back and that we can't collect, then that's a structural deficit. And the way the department has to balance it, either they self-fund it or they ask Mother County to pay for it, or to help curtail that revenue loss. So it's all kind of in a big picture type of thing. We do want to make sure there is sufficient staff. If the halls have a shortage, then we may need to add more staff. And maybe when we look at the staffing ratio, we may determine that we still need to add more staffing. And that is something we would have to look at the budget and how we would fund it.
So I have one last question. the 99 item, is that ever a possibility of coming back? Because that seemed to, back like 5-6 years ago, curtail some of the things that were happening in the halls to keep people from calling out and caring about their time because they can be reassigned. Is that an
I
item
think
that
the
can come back?
99 is the 99 is something I think Mr. Smythe might be able to answer that. I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with.
Yeah, with pay location 99, I think. Hi, Krista, how are you?
Hi.
I think I met you a long time ago. But anyway, pay location 99 was something that the probation department used to place people who are off on long-term leave. Generally wanted to put them there only when they had no benefits remaining, so there wasn't a cost to, wasn't a significant cost to the department in order to be able to fill behind them. So when a person is out on leave, that person still blocks, they fill the position that they're holding. So if they're DSO in the halls, they're on that DSO item, even though they're not able to come to work. And pay location 9 was the ability to move them out. It has to be done very judiciously. I don't think that's been considered recently, because you can't put people on pay location 99 that are getting paid and fill behind them, because then you have 2 people getting paid for 1 item. And if you do that too much, you're basically going to bankrupt the department. The other thing I want to clarify was one of the first answers to a question that you asked, and that is, yes, there's no freeze on things like the field, but if the camps can't, if the halls can't hire, then the field's not going to get anyone other than lateral transfers, because that pipeline is blocked at the front end. So later on down the pipeline can't be filled because you got the front end blocked. So now it doesn't mean completely blocked. We have to go to the CEO and provide a significant, robust justification to support hiring, and we have done that in several cases. So, but pay location 99, I would not recommend it. That's what I used to call a budget buster.
Thank you, Krista, for your comments, and Mr. Smythe for your response. Seems like a couple of other hands were raised over the last few minutes, and since I've been seeing Nicole's for some time, we'd like to hear from you now.
Thanks for giving me comment as a member of the public. Nicole Brown, Urban Peace Institute. I just, wanted to thank everyone and just make a couple comments. One, I did learn a lot today, so I'm happy for that. And at the same time, for me, I'm looking at, if you look at the actual budget and the adopted budget each year, the probation department continues to underspend in the tens of millions. And as a person who is actively trying to get ongoing funding to the Department of Youth Development, I really want to seek to understand why, and hope to see ongoing funding from the Probation Department be allocated to the new Department of Youth Development. And then I just want to thank Commissioner Lewis and others who have raised the issue of staffing. I really, from the outside, it's hard for me to understand what's happening. Nobody wants to see Mary J understaffed. We know it's bad for the youth that they're suffering, and that it's also bad for the staff who are showing up. It's hard from the outside to understand, if you have staff from 2 halls and everyone goes into 1 hall, shouldn't you have way more staff than not less staff, right? And so I think understanding what is going on is extremely important for the young people and for probation department and everyone as a whole. It seems to be something that is beyond just vacant positions, because these vacant positions have been there for years. There seems to be something more going on, and so just wanted to raise that as my comment. And last things, would be great to see those fixed costs that Mr. Smythe referenced and really understand them for each camp. Yeah, that's the last thing I'll say, because I lost track of my thought. But thank you for allowing me to make a comment.
And I need to correct one thing that I said previously, and that is, I said $1 million is 1% of the budget. $10 million is 1%. See, I'm an ashamed accountant for saying that. So every 1%. So for example, in the JIS budget, we have, let's say, it's about $3.2 million, $323 million in their budget. So 2% cost of living increase is what, about $6-point-something million. We averaged about roughly a 2.5% increase in overall costs. It's not just salaries and benefits, but an overall cost in our budget. So it's millions and millions of dollars every year that increases and increases and increases. So people ask, why is there a cut yet the budget went up? That's part of the reason why. The other thing is, there are one-time costs that come in and go out of the budget for things like capital projects. When we're building CCTV programs, for example, those millions of dollars are brought into our operating budget, spent on CCTV, and then go out. So every year it has to be a deep dive to look at the records to find out what were those one-time impacts in and out. We also talked about pretrial services today. That was a one-time impact in, and now it's going out because it's over. So those sorts of things occur. Home-like renovations are coming up. That's millions of dollars. That's going to come into our money, into our budget as operating funds one time to pay for that home-like, and then it's out the next year. So anyway, that's it for me. Thank you. I'm sorry about the math error.
Thank you, Mr. Smythe. We appreciate your candor. Moving on to Commissioner Garcia Lay.
Hi. So I wasn't going to ask this because I didn't think you would know, but you guys seem to have a better handle on the staffing than I expected, which I appreciate. Ms. Hamwang or Mr. Smythe, do either of you know how many positions are allocated to Campus Kilpatrick?
I
don't know.
I don't know, but I can get it, but I just don't have it right at my fingertips. Yeah.
All right. I didn't think you would. I just wanted to ask that because it sounds like maybe you did. But thank you. Okay, I'll take that question back.
Okay, and we're circling back to Commissioner Lewis, who has raised his hand again.
Thank you, Commissioner Jackson. So I finally found my notes from that day. I was trying to figure out which notebook they were in. And so on the particular day that visiting was canceled, I really wanted to know more. And there are two things I want to just state for both the commission, for the public, and hopefully a recommendation that we might be able to push. So one, the minimum number of staff to operate Barry J. Night Off is 88. 88 staff. That's the minimum number. On this particular day, there were 76, 12 call-outs happened that day. That's why children couldn't see their parents and couldn't have programming, couldn't come out and run on the grass, and were just locked in places where they shouldn't have to be for hours. If there's a hiring freeze for the halls, which is causing all of the issues, can we submit, like, I think that the correct move is to ask the CEO, like, we need staff in there. I don't want to see, like, whatever it takes to get our kids what they need, and right now staffing in order to bring more programming in and make sure that they can go outside, make sure they can play basketball, and they can go to school every single day and go to college every single day. Then they need staff. Then the hiring freeze needs to be removed, because the harm is happening to the children, and they're not, like, I feel like they're political pawns in a silly game that adults are playing, when we should be saying, what do we need to do to protect these young people? Yes, they've run afoul of law, and we're holding them accountable while they're in these facilities, but we also need to make sure that we care for them and give them what they need. And in order to do that, staffing has to be up to level. And if we can't do that, then, like, I shouldn't even be on this commission if I'm not going to say this. The hiring freeze has to stop in order for us to run programs inside Barry J. and Central Juvenile Hall, because prior to Central going to Barry J, but prior to the youth going to Barry J, they had staffing issues also at Central Juvenile Hall. And so it wasn't like these staffing issues didn't happen there. They were happening at both facilities. And now they're just at Barry J. We see it. We know what it is. Let's fix it.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Lewis. I definitely think that gives us cause to revisit that for one of our full commission meetings. Wendy, I think this is a good time to close us out in respect of everyone's time. And I will also say that it still feels like this subject is pretty open, and we're going to be looking forward to carrying on conversation about the budget. This is not a sort of dead end, not a dead end, but this is not the end of this discussion about what's happening with the department's money. And so if no one else has comments, I'm gonna just thank you all for attending. I hope you found this meeting productive and fruitful. Our next commission meeting is going to be taking place on Thursday, May 12th at 12 p.m. Thank you for getting those visuals up. You can find registration details to register on the POC website at poc.lacounty.gov. Thank you, everyone, for your time. This concludes our town hall for tonight. It is now 7:49 p.m. and I adjourn this meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.